On behalf of the organizing committee, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you to this, the first workshop day of the inaugural Australian Mises Seminar meeting. I thoroughly enjoyed last night's dinner and Professor Hopper's eloquent introduction into, into the ideas that he shared with us on private property ownership and the benefits thereof will provide us with great fuel to help drive and direct the discussions that will happen today. As was mentioned last night, let's network, let's share new ideas and interact so that we can make the most of this occasion and bring it forward into the future. With that in mind, it is my great pleasure to introduce today's opening speaker, who is Mark Tier. He needs no introduction, certainly after last night. However, do indulge me as I provide, by way of some highlights, by way of introduction, that you can find on his website, marktier.com. He boasts several achievements in journalism over the span of his illustrious career. He is the founder of the investment newsletter, World Money Analyst, which he published and edited until 1991. He's the author of several books, including Understanding Inflation, a 1974 Australian bestseller, also The Nature of Market Cycles, and everybody's personal favorite, I'm sure, How to Get a Second Passport, which he published in 1984. He also served as Hong Kong correspondent for the New York Journal of Commerce in the late 70s, and he was also a columnist for the Australian Stock Exchange Journal and Business Traveller. He's also published articles in various themes in publications such as Reason Magazine, Time and The Australian, and he's also spoken in seminars and featured in various events around the world in places like America, London, Hong Kong, and Singapore. He also has a passion for mentorship and coaches investors who want to transform their investment results. Therefore, we're privileged to have a man of his standing with us here this morning. So therefore, please join me in welcoming Mark Tier.
So, let's see an ashtray. Anyone got an ashtray?
Not allowed in this house.
I guess not. What I found here instead. Well, despite that no smoking sign, can you hear me okay? Just making sure this thing works. What would happen if I actually lit this, you think?
The fire alarm will go out.
Say again?
The fire alarms will go out.
Fire alarms might, yes? I better stand over here. No, what would happen?
Open the window and you'll be okay, given all here.
Well, you guys don't seem to mind, which is great. I'm sure, however, there's a slight other problem, however, on this issue, as you may be aware. Now, let's see if this is going to work. Right? There is a law that says you may not smoke in here. And if I lit that up, there'll be a very expensive smoke, $550 maximum. Now, this is the law of the New South Wales government. What about if the proprietor of this establishment or of some restaurant, whatever establishment you like, is also a smoker? And he has no objection to smokers smoking in his establishment. Well, if he owns it and I smoke in his establishment with his permission, it's going to cost him $5.5 grand. And if he's just the manager, it's going to cost him $1,100 bucks, right? And me $550. Now, if you own a property, and please correct me if I'm wrong, don't you have the right to do with it whatever you want?
Not Australia.
No, I'm talking about the rights, not the law. On a question of on a matter of the philosophy of property rights, if you own this room, this restaurant, you have the right to say, you may all smoke in here, or you may not smoke in here, or you can dance naked on the tables, or whatever you like as the owner of this property. Correct? Am I right? Right. Similarly, you have the right to exclude anyone you wish. You don't like blacks, we'll send this guy out. You don't like whites, send everyone else out. You know what I'm getting at? You have the right to admit or exclude anyone you like if it is your property on the basis of property rights theory. Now, obviously, what has happened here? We have a law in this state that says the proprietor of any property, defined as in here as a pub, you know, where people from the public are invited, not one's house. You can still smoke in your house at the moment, and does not have that right anymore. His property rights have been infringed. A part of that property right has been taken away. Now, here's a question for you. If you own a property and one part of your ownership of that property has been taken away, who owns the property now? Is it still your property? And okay, this is a minor thing compared to all sorts of other government invasions. But that's not the point. Let's think about the principle involved here. So tell me, if you do not have the right to let people smoke in your property, do you own your property anymore? Well, let me put it differently. If you do not pay the rates, or property taxes as they're called in the US, what happens? Yeah, well, property's taken away. So when you have to pay tax to the government just for the right of having your property, do you own it? Certainly, sorry?
Conditionally.
Conditionally, not 100%, not absolutely. So now, is this important? Now, I like to I don't know if anyone remembers the Goon Show. I guess if you have to be 50 plus to remember the Goon Show. But Harry Seacombe, it was a British radio comedy program, which is really great if you ever look it up on YouTube. Harry Seacombe put the question of property rights, or the why property rights are important, very, very succinctly. He said, everybody got to be somewhere. Everybody got to be somewhere. As Professor Hoppe was demonstrating last night, if you do not have the right to stand somewhere, you become a slave, because then you can only exist by permission of somebody else. And this is why property rights are important, because a lot of people talk about human rights, but unless you have property rights, it's impossible to. Property rights are the way human rights, the only way that human rights can be implemented, the recognition of property rights, because everybody got to be somewhere. It was interesting that, I guess it was in the 60s, that Ayn Rand met with Hugh Hefner and persuaded him of this argument, at least briefly, on the basis that she pointed out, now, if the government owns all the printing presses, or if the Catholic Church has a monopoly of the printing press, or the government merely requires you to have a license to buy newsprint or the glossy paper to print a magazine or book paper, Now, it does not need to impose censorship, quote unquote. It can simply deny you the use of a printing press by creating a monopoly which excludes everyone else. Or it can deny you the paper with which to print, which is exactly what happened in the First World War and in the Civil War in the US and in many other places from time to time, aside from outright censorship. The point is, once you infringe a property right, then you infringe on that person's human rights, that person's ability to exercise his right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, of course, the question of smoking appears to be, and for most people is, a minor issue in terms of rights. I mean, the rights argument doesn't really come up, because the rights argument doesn't really come up in anything, really, in the public debate. But let's consider how this came about. It's a health issue, right? Smoking, we are told, is bad for you. As a matter of interest, who agrees that smoking is bad for you? Please raise your hands. Okay, thank you. Who thinks smoking is good for you? One person, good for you. Two, who's agnostic? The rest of you. Now, here we have possibly a random sample. Out of 100 people, 2 people think smoking is good for you, which is probably 2 people more than you'll find in the general public. I mean, it's quite obvious to everybody that smoking kills. We've heard this again and again, and it's obvious. I mean, you smokers, excuse me, they cough, right? They run out of breath, etc., etc. It's obvious smoking is bad for your health. So you don't need any research. The average person in the street doesn't need any research results, doesn't need any scientific evidence, doesn't need any proof, scientific proof, to know, quote unquote, that smoking kills. As a matter of interest, let me ask one further question on the health issue. Who thinks that, sticking to the question of health, ignoring the other benefits a smoker might have, like getting high, are there any actual concrete health benefits of smoking? Does anyone think there are? They may or may not outweigh the negative health benefits. I'm just saying, is there at least one issue? So yeah, good, that's about 5 or 6 people. Now, this is actually an interesting issue because, well, most people think smoking kills. In fact, smoking does have some positive benefits. For example, there have been many, many studies where animals have been injected with nicotine or they've had things attached to their throats so they smoke, you know, a dozen packets a day in an effort to induce lung cancer in these animals. Now, just on that particular subject, there was a case in, where are we, the state of Minnesota. Where did I go? When the state of Minnesota sued the tobacco companies in 1998 for recompense for the health costs incurred by smokers that they were forking out money for. Experts for both the state and the tobacco companies agreed that every animal study failed to induce lung cancer in animals, despite numerous attempts with countless animals and at various quantities and concentrations. Every animal study failed to induce lung cancer. Yet, we are told by the smoke Nazis that smokers have a higher incidence of lung cancer, etc., than non-smokers. Now, I don't want to really get into the health issue, but let me just give you one other example. I'll give you 2 other examples. the in one experiment, this was to do with the effect of radioactive particles. Every animal they tested, that they exposed to radioactive particles, died, 100% death rate. Now, by some mistake, 3,000 mice who'd been in this smoking experiment, trying to induce lung cancer, got pushed into the radiation experiment. 60% of those mice who'd been smoking, exposed to smoke, lived. 60% lived. So if they start dropping bombs, you better start smoking. And also, smokers have a far lower incidence, the likelihood of getting Parkinson's and Alzheimer's disease. So there are some actual demonstrated health benefits of smoking, and there are questionable negatives, because a lot of the research has failed to produce the results that the people hope for. In fact, the first research done on this issue was by a guy called Richard Doll in London in the 1950s. His study is still quoted today. It's the original one that shows a supposed link between smoking and cancer. However, it turned out that Richard, who was later Sir Richard Doll, had a very lucrative career as a research, quote-unquote, scientist for hire. His services were used by Dow Chemical, ICI, among other companies. He even made a submission to the Royal Commission here in Australia, proving, quote-unquote, that Agent Orange did not cause cancer. In other words, you say, well, I want this result, he'd do the research to support it and a nice fee. And in fact, in the December 2001 issue of the British Medical Journal, he wrote, and I quote, that the smoking study, was devised to achieve the maximum publicity for the critical link between smoking and lung cancer. So, but you see, this doesn't matter. All this is irrelevant, because it's obvious that smoking kills. Everyone agrees that smoking kills. Now, obviously, the tobacco companies tried to oppose all these regulations, and they lost. And all the research they produced was obviously biased, because it was produced by these evil multinationals. This is the general public's attitude. So it was obviously biased. It was in their self-interest to produce results that said there is no connection. I mean, it was obvious that smoking kills, so anything that supported that, you didn't need to question it. And, of course, the majority of people are non-smokers. More than half of the people are probably worn out. And within smokers themselves, again, the region of the realm of smokers, a lot of smokers want to quit for one reason or another. But it's very hard to quit smoking. So they're quite happy to be forced to quit smoking. So let's say, most of the non-smokers, I mean, they don't care. If you want to smoke, go outside. It's not my problem. And half the smokers say are quite happy for no smoking laws to come into effect. So a very small minority of smokers who would actively oppose them if there was any likely chance of succeeding. So now, of course, we all go outside and have a smoke, those of us who still smoke. And once I was at a seminar in a convention in New Orleans, and I was outside and have a smoke at the little big convention I went there a long way. And there were a whole lot of people out there having a smoke. And one of these guys had his badge, I said, put my badge on, which said Philip Morris. So I started talking to him, and I said to him, now, why, you guys are being persecuted by, the government, etc., for because you produce a product that supposedly causes cancer. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. That's really not the point. Why don't you stand up instead of, you've been arguing with these guys about the health issue. They're presenting all this evidence that smoking is bad for you, and you're standing up saying, no, it's not. I mean, that's a losing argument. You let these guys set the terms of the debates. You're never going to win that argument. Why don't you stand up and say, everyone under the American Constitution has the right to go to hell in their own way. If they want to smoke, it's their decision. It's got nothing to do with you. You, the government, do not have the right to steal or to tell people what to do. Oh, no. We could never do anything like that. So the only issue that possibly could have won that debate was one on the question of rights. Of course, probably just as well they didn't, because it would have smeared the whole rights issue with the usual multinationals and so on. But anyway, the point is that they argued on losing terms and lost. But in the end of the day, actually the big companies, they didn't really mind too much. Why? Because it raises the barrier to entry. Right? There is very little competition now in the supply of tobacco. Because who can afford the the costs of possible legal costs, etc., of going into that business. So you've got 2 or 3 major companies in the US producing cigarettes, etc., and they're very happy to be taxed. They're very happy to be restricted. They're very happy to have labels. I mean, they're complaining, but they're very happy because their oligopoly, if you like, is protected against dirty competition, which is just as well. Now, in the Philippines, for example, you can buy a packet of cigarettes. What does it cost? Cigarettes cost, what, $16 a packet here? Something like that. In the Philippines, you can buy that same packet of cigarettes, including Philippine tax, for 50 cents. So, most of the price of a packet of cigarettes is taxed. Okay, now, so what is likely to happen if property rights are respected? And we still have the same situation. I mean, there are a lot of non-smokers who think smoking kills and don't want to be in the same room with smokers. So there is a market demand for non-smoking restaurants. Similarly, there is a market demand for restaurants where you can smoke. Well, let's take another example, McDonald's. Quick example first. McDonald's, I don't know how many years ago, changed the packaging of their Big Macs, if you don't remember that. They used to come in styrofoam boxes. They now come in cardboard boxes. Why did they change? They changed because there was a campaign in the US from the Green movement about these, these unrecyclable styrofoam boxes, the packaging that McDonald's was using, and there was a threat of a boycott, and McDonald's was getting a bad name because it's not green enough, etc., so they switched their packaging. Because of market pressure from people who believe this particular issue. There's no government regulation at that time, and maybe now. So in other words, the market can, the market expresses people's opinions as well as their demands through their pockets. So now, recently in the Philippines, what's the next one on that? Recently in the Philippines, where I've been living for the last few years, Starbucks, which is very successful in the Philippines, it's a locally owned franchise from the US company, so it's a Philippine company paying franchise. And the owners are a bunch of greenies. So out of the blue, they announced that all their restaurants nationwide were going to be no smoking from whatever date, April or something like that. So this was intriguing. I predicted they'd lose 20% of their business, just like gross. Now this was taken, as I recall, 3:30 on a Sunday afternoon, after the no smoking policy had come into effect. Now, you can see on a great picture, you can see here the Starbucks logo. There's the button. Yeah. Okay, inside there, that's air conditioning area, which, you know, by law is no smoking. Here, these outside tables are tables where smokers congregate, and, you know, the humidity, flies and mosquitoes, while no smokers were in air conditioned comfort. And you can see there's one person, or two. 3:30 on a Sunday afternoon at this particular location. You could not find an empty table before the smoking ban. There was no empty table. There might be empty seats, but no empty table. Here's another one. Nope, wrong button. I'm supposed to point this. Oh, press a different button, right? There's another one, 7 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon. Yeah, Sunday evening. Same thing. This is the smoking area here. Well, there are a couple of people here. No one else. That's the same thing. 7 o'clock on a Sunday evening. You could not find a table there. So this lunacy went on for 5 weeks. Now, being a private company, they never produced, you know, we don't know their financial results. But you could see that they were hurting. They were losing a lot of business. And one of the stores I went into, the lady told me, she put it this way, she said, what we used to sell on Monday, like in one day, Monday, now takes Monday to Thursday. In other words, that store had lost 75% of its gross income. Now the problem, the Starbucks management had a problem, obviously. They were going to lose, they were already talking about, they already cut store hours, they were reducing no overtime, of course, reducing hours, etc., talking about firing people. And they had a big problem. So there were two ways to go about it. Now don't forget, this was Starbucks Philippines' own decision. It had nothing to do with the law. You could go anywhere else where there were outdoor tables and smoke, and that's of course where smokers went. But not only did smokers go to other places, other coffee shops, other restaurants, their no-smoking friends, some of their no-smoking friends, a lot of their no-smoking friends went with them. Hence, empty stores. Now, so the Starbucks management had a problem. They really had two choices. The first choice was, of course, to back off, restore the smoking tables, get their customers back. Of course, not all their customers were going to come back because they found that some of them would have found that they really prefer the coffee or the pies or whatever at, you know, another place. So that was a stupid decision to begin with. The other option they had was to persuade the government to ban smoking in all restaurants. Now this would have failed for the simple reason, at that particular moment, I'm not saying it would fail now, but at that particular moment it would have failed, because all the other restaurants who were benefiting from Starbucks' stupidity would have opposed that move. Right? Now, I don't know whether they even considered that as an option, but in any case, after 5 weeks, they scored, their sanity came back. So this is the same place taken from the other side. This is after smoking tables have returned. Now you see these ones are empty. Because when they put the smoking tables back, they kept the ones near the door of the store kept as non-smoking tables that are still empty. Now here's that other place. Now, this is an interesting one, what happened here. Because when they put the smoking tables back, this is before, when the no smoking ban was in effect. This is after. This is about 1 o'clock on a Sunday, last Sunday actually. Usually, later on it'll be fuller than that. But what happened when they put the smoking tables back? That was the smoking area. These were still non-smoking tables, because this is the Philippines, a bit like Italy, but with fewer observers of the rules. I'll give you an example. There are. I mean, driving in Manila is the closest thing I ever expect to get to anarchy in my lifetime. Perhaps like Cairo, maybe Istanbul, I'm not sure. I've been to Istanbul. But a friend of mine there told me there are traffic rules. Rule number 1 is whoever's in front is right. Rule number 2 is if you see an empty space, occupy it. Rule number 3 is traffic lights are only advisory. And so these are rules, they are real rules. Nobody wrote them down, but if you observe the behavior of the drivers, that's the rules they follow. And of course the traffic lights are only advisory, they follow them, that rule when there's no policeman inside. Anyway, so smokers, when they came back here, started ignoring these no smoking signs. So what the management did was expanded the smoking area until the full smoking area was restored. The entrance of the door in this case is over around the corner, so there are other bullets that fly. Now, this is a reverse market option. The point is the market will determine through the demands of the customers whether there are smoking areas or no smoking areas, whether blacks will be served or not served. Now, for example, when you look at segregation in the South of America and apartheid, one reason they had rules that blacks were not permitted in these restaurants is because there were some restaurant owners, and they could have even been Ku Klux Klan members, for all we know, who were happy to serve blacks because they paid. They made money. It was profitable to serve the persecuted races. And you can see if there have been no laws against desegregation, there were no desegregation laws, no laws outlawing blacks or colours or whatever other people, non-whites were using this, then very slowly the market would have eroded those restrictions, while maintaining the right, of course, for the property owner to exclude anyone he wants. So the same sort of thing happened here. The market spoke and the management listened, because the alternative was to go out of business. And when the market speaks and is allowed to speak, then property rights and human rights are safeguarded. Because when the government comes in and begins to do things like it did with smoking, the only way the government can achieve what it wants is by taking away some of your rights. And inevitably that means taking away some of your property rights, because that's how human rights are exercised. There is no other way. But the government doesn't come in. I mean, this is why the smoking examples are perfect. It's a very good example. The government doesn't. There was a time when everybody smoked. It was not a problem. A few nutters who thought smoking was bad for you, and you smoked anywhere you liked. There were no smoking places except perhaps in the intensive care wards of hospitals. Now they didn't change that overnight. They didn't say you didn't wake up one morning and find that, okay, now smoking is banned in all restaurants, you've got to go outside, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. No, they didn't do that. They first started requiring no smoking areas in restaurants. Now, smoke over there, but not here. Then they required perhaps a walled-off area, ventilated and so on. It was salami tactics, slice by slice, and slice by slice. And they keep adding small things, little tiny steps, like little steps. Like in Queensland now, you're not allowed to smoke outside. I mean, where food is served. It's crazy. Sunshine State. Now, if I've often thought about setting up a smokers' rights, like for which would call for a Japanese boycott of Queensland. The Japanese smoke, and the Chinese for that matter. Anyway, never got around to that. So the difference between now and then, if anyone's read 1984, you'll remember that Big Brother is watching you, right? That's from I think, a poster for the movie. But George Orwell was wrong in one respect, because Big Brother is watching you as a bit too in your face. You know, he's not a friendly sort of character, right? Today we have Big Sister is looking after you. And when Big Sister looks after you in the cradle-to-grave welfare state, the only way she can do that, of course, is by putting one hand in your pocket and the other hand up your ass or whatever. In other words, the third one taking stuff away from you, because she's got to finance it. Plus, of course, all those people in the middle are going to have their share. Thank you very much.